Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again, live from Film Fanatic headquarters. Hope everyone's doing good. It's Monday at about 10 o'clock. So, yeah, thanks again for everybody chiming in. It's been really cool the last week or so. I've had about, 40 subscribers, and it's been nice. It's been a nice, pretty steady climb where this channel has been growing more and more. And I'm trying to, again, I do videos every day. I love doing it. I don't like to kind of at a point now. It's funny. I'm kind of at a point now where I don't really, uh, you know, uh, try not to miss a day. Even if technically I can't really do a video for, various reasons if I have stuff going on. Like yesterday morning, for instance, I had a lot of things going on. Well, quite a bit of things going on in the morning where I had to get ready for this gig that originally was going to be on a different day, but it got moved to a Sunday. And then the time got moved up to the early morning or early afternoon. But I wanted to be ready to go because of the event. It was at the Camden Snowball during the toboggan races, and I was like, well, I want to get there early because I know it's going to be jamming with thousands of people, and it's always every time I've played there, it's usually for the most part a good time, but it's always crazy as far as the logistics, like parking your car and alone itself. Just that itself is usually just a total fucking circus, and everything else is usually okay, but it's usually not that great overall. But this year was a little bit of a better gig that came up. It was a much better of a scenario. So, but it was chaotic because the snowball was closed. So there was all this because of the extreme cold that we had. So it got changed, and then the time got moved earlier. So like I did a video in the morning, but I didn't have time to upload it or to do the other stuff that I do with the tagging and doing all the posting stuff and and all those kinds of things. But I did the video, and then later on that night I came home and I finished it. And I usually when I do these videos I usually do it in the same time after I shoot them. After I film them, I usually just I check them out, make sure it's pretty decent, and then I'll upload it and do all the other stuff around it. And it doesn't usually take very much time, but I'm at a point now where I really enjoy doing it, so I hate to miss a day, even if I don't have the time to do it. I try to make it happen because it's fairly easy to do. It does take a little bit of time, especially with the uploading it and getting a photo for the like a good thumbnail photo, and then doing the tagging aspect of it, and then usually I upload it to a couple of other pages when that's done, and that takes a little bit of time to do that. It takes maybe altogether the whole process takes maybe an hour and a half each day to do. When I do the interview segments, that takes a lot longer because the videos are longer, and because they're interview segments and I have guests on there, I usually make sure that I watch the video all the way through, make sure there's not any bad part, or at least parts to where I have to edit it out or maybe redo it. But I usually have to be a little bit more meticulous with that, and I usually have to watch the video all the way through. And those videos tend to be, an hour and a half or over an hour or so, and then they take a little bit longer because they're bigger files to upload, and then I have to like send it out to the person first, whoever that guest was, see what they think of it, get their okay, and then I'll upload it and do all those other things, so that takes a usually if I do And usually when I do a interview video, I I it takes me. I usually upload it the following day. I don't usually do it that same day because I have to do those things, and that usually takes a couple hours to do. So that takes a little longer, and there's a little bit more, a few more things to think about or to worry about when I do those videos. Luckily, I haven't had to redo any of them. I think they've all come out pretty good. I've been pretty happy with them. But the process itself takes longer. But when I do these other videos where I'm just doing these things, it's pretty easy for me to do. So, but I try not to miss a day. I used to if I couldn't do it in the morning, I would just like to let it go and just skip a day. But now I love doing it so much, and now I try to do it. Uh, I try to make the time anyway because it doesn't take all that much time to do. But anyway, so today brings me to a movie that I have kind of a long and interesting history with. The night Evelyn came out of her grave, or the night Evelyn came out of the grave. This is a an amazing giallo horror exploitation movie from 1971. Totally bizarre movie. I have a really long history with this film. It's kind of a pretty funny story, and I don't know. In a nutshell, I feel like it really sums up of why I love these exploitation movies so much, and again why I always can't stress it enough, but I love all styles of films, and all kinds of genres. But this is like the reason, another example as to why horror and particularly the horror exploitation world, and really all things exploitation is my favorite genre. It's like my obsession, and I just love it. It's just uh, feels like you're in a you're all day or all night you're in this amusement park, and you just don't want to leave. It's just that that energy for me is just really infectious, and that's why I always now that's like my focus, and it's just great. It's a whole new thing as far as diving deep. I've always loved these films, but as far as diving deep into these films and kind of really immersing myself in this exploitation world, that's a new thing for me. So, and that's been just a great ride because I've been discovering tons of new directors, tons of new films, rediscovering films that I saw when I was a kid. It's just been an awesome ride. And, I really love too, there's been a lot more people commenting on these videos. And there was one guy in particular that uh, who I was corresponding with, who I feel like really nails the point or that kind of the essence as to why I do these videos and kind of what I'm about. Uh, he was like talking about how he's a big fan of horror films, but he watches a lot of these videos on Film Fanatic and actually makes these little lists of films that he's never seen that I've talked about, and he's like discovering all of these new films. And lately, I've been doing a lot of films that I just bought, and I never seen before, and I've just been blown away by some of these films. And that's it. That to me, in a nutshell, that's why I do the show. It's all about these films, and it's all about bringing certain weird, obscure films, or these weird and obscure films to the table. That if you have a pretty eclectic taste and an open mind, and especially if you like horror, uh, it's just incredible. It's an incredible ride and journey into like these incredibly strange films, and it's just awesome. And this film came out, like I said, 1971. It's a kind of labeled as a giallo horror film. It was directed by Emilio Miraglia. It came out in 72, which is amazing. It's an Italian film. Super uber bizarre movie. It's basically centered on this main character who, this guy who he at one point his wife dies, and during this whole time he basically more or less loses his mind, and he gets put into a mental institution, and he breaks out of this mental institution, but then goes kind of on this rampage of where he's like kidnapping these women, and then he's also coercing these women that he knows, and he brings them into his like totally demented fantasy world of where he's like obsessed with like S&M and bondage and it's and torture. And this movie is really it really pushes the envelope as far as it's definitely psychosexual, and it is like really centered on this man who's like essentially a madman, just completely crazy. And it rides that line of where he's like bringing women in that are kind of participants, but then also aspects of where he's bringing women into this his insane world of where they're clearly not. And it also rides this line of where you're not sure if all of these things are happening in his head or it's actually happening. And there's like all these like elaborate scenes of where and he has this he lives in this giant house that's like kind of this castle, and he lures these women in, and he has this like like a dungeon in the basement of this castle. And the sets are amazing. It's got this real gothic vibe to it, and there's all of this insane S&M that takes place. There's chains and whips and leather and cages and just crazy. And there's also a supernatural element because at one point what he's imagining, and you kind of think maybe it's really happening or maybe it's not, where his like wife is coming back to him after she's been dead for a long time, and he's like further descending into this world of total madness, and is like he starts having these uh, experiences where he feels like his wife is coming back to like basically kind of free him from this whole kind of this insane world that he's created. But it's a this movie is totally bonkers. It's got this real psychedelic quality that I love about it. There's the whole scene of where in the beginning of the film where he breaks out of this mental institution is super trippy and super weird. There's all this crazy editing where the film is slowed down and it's all like choppy, and it has all of this like real psychedelic music, super trippy, and that whole kind of sequence kind of sets the tone for the movie, um, and it's a cool combination of like kind of classic giallo with like classic kind of gothic horror, because the setting itself is like takes place in more or less like a gothic environment, almost like a castle. So it has all those trappings. It's got all these beautiful, elaborate gothic set pieces and giant candle holders, and it's very dark. It's very spooky. It's a pretty scary environment. And then it has the giallo element where it's really suspenseful. It kind of messes with your expectation. There's like an aspect of the film of where it's got this real investigative quality to it, where you're not really sure what's going on, and you're getting all of these little bits of information along the way as to what is maybe really happening. And I feel like the giallo genre itself is relatively new for me, as far as like getting into it as a particular style of filmmaking. I've always been aware of it, and I've always known what it is, but I just didn't know until fairly recently that it's an actual style. Uh, and usually, one of the classic things from the giallo style, is there's always like kind of like this murder mystery aspect to it. There's always um, a character who's like the gloved killer or the masked killer in the film, and there it usually always has this aspect to the film or to those films where they really mess with the expectations. It goes into all these unpredictable areas where you don't really you have to pay attention. And you're really surprised as to where things are going. There's always sometimes there's an element of where there's like some kind of conspiratorial thing going on too with other characters, and there's like this cat and mouse aspect going back and forth. So it always has like it has like this puzzle piece kind of structure to it, and I think that's like a I would say that's a real big characteristic of classic kind of giallo style. And giallo is, an Italian style of filmmaking that was started in like the late 50s, early 60s, 70s, and 80s. Um, Classic filmmakers like Jess Franco is a really great purveyor of that style, where they blended all of those kind of characteristics, but then also with sex exploitation and also horror elements and slasher elements. Very cool genre, but the giallo thing always kind of reminds me of aspects of like Hitchcock films where there's always a level of suspense, and it really messes with your expectations. It goes into areas of where the person who you thought maybe was the villain is suddenly the hero, or there's a little group of people in the story that are plotting against another people, and there's like this cat and mouse thing going on. But there's always this air of mystery around it, and usually another thing around giallo is like the over the top lighting and the kind of in your face aspect of that. In this movie, I have a really funny, weird history with it because I got this movie quite a few years ago, like 10 or 12 years ago. I was friends with this guy named Ian. We've kind of gone in different social circles and lost touch, but at that time, 10 or 12 years ago, I had this circle of friends, and he was a really good friend, and we used to go out for beers a lot and hang out, and he was also into horror films. And I remember one day he's like, "Hey, you should see this movie. It's totally like one of the most bizarre movies I've ever seen, but it's kind of a piece of crap." And he kind of like gave it to me as like a joke to like, and I kind of feel like in hindsight he gave it to me to initially borrow as a joke, but then he was like kind of doing it to mess with me. And then I eventually watched it, and I found myself like, what the hell did I just watch? Like this movie is totally crazy. Um, and then we kind of lost touch for a while, and then I never got the movie back to him, and I eventually kept it. And I always thought in the back of my mind he gave it to me as like a joke to kind of mess with me, kind of a thing, and not like, well, no, like this is a cool movie, check it out, I actually dig it, kind of thing. It was like, no, it's really terrible. You should watch it. And over time, I've seen this movie a bunch of times. I just totally fell in love with this movie, and I love this movie. It's one of my favorite exploitation movies, and it's just totally bizarre. It's got all those aspects of these films that I love, and and I only have this copy that I got from my friend Ian at the time, and it's a pretty crappy DVD copy. It's not a very good quality picture or anything, but yet I've seen this movie uh, a ridiculous amount of times. I eventually want to. I need to get this on Blu-ray, like a good transfer of this, and because that would be really awesome to actually see a good quality version of this film. But again, I just love this movie, and it's followed the same path. Like that same thing happened to me with quite a few films in the exploitation world, but probably the biggest one. The same thing happened to me around my favorite exploitation movie of all time, Tourist Trap, starring Chuck Connors. That's my favorite grindhouse exploitation movie of all time. And again, that was a movie I saw all the time as a kid. It was on cable. It didn't have it was not able when that movie came out. It was not able to get a rated R, so it was really limited in its theatrical run. But it got a PG rating, which is so like messed up. And then it was put into syndication on cable, and that's how it made money. And it was in this constant rotation for quite a few years, and it was literally on television all the time. And I used to watch it all the time. And it was a PG rated movie, and it has there's no violent, like, there's no gore in it per se. There's not any real sex, or insane amounts of violence. Every there it is. All those things are in that film big time, but because it's PG rated, there's a lot of those things you just don't see. It's really left up to your imagination. It's kind of all those things are really heavily implied, but you know it's there. Um, and I used to watch it all the time as a kid, and then fast forward quite a few years after that, like probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I was over my parents' house with my girlfriend at the time, and my mom had just come back from the store. They went to Bull Moose and they picked up the Tourist Trap on DVD for like $1. And my mom's like, "Hey, do you remember this movie? You used to watch it all the time. It stars Chuck Connors." Chuck Connors. And I was like, "Oh my God, yeah, I totally forgot about it. I hadn't seen it in years and years and years, but I always I remembered it right away. I was like, oh my God." And I remember we watched it that night, and my parents were just like laughing at it, and they just thought it was like just pretty much unwatchable. That it was like a piece of crap. And my girlfriend at the time had never seen it before, and she felt it was really terrible also. But then she kind of felt that there were certain aspects and certain things that happened in the film that were just like were were some of the most disturbing and some of the creepiest things she's ever seen in film. And she's like, wow, like that movie was so awful and terrible, but yet, across the boards, but yet it had these certain things about it that were just so like creepy and just like it would just get under your skin. And then I remember keeping that copy of The Tourist Trap, and I watched it a bunch of other times, and I was just like, and then I found myself falling in love with that film all over again. And then before I knew it, I was like, this movie's amazing. And then I was in Bull Moose a couple of years later, or like 2 years ago or so. I was in Bull Moose, and they had Tourist Trap on Blu-ray, like a remastered director's cut. And the copy that I have of that, I have a few copies of The Tourist Trap on DVD. The copy that I had gotten from my folks was like a really, pretty bad DVD copy. Just kind of like this, quality wise. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, what? Like, Tourist Trap is one of those movies, too. If you look it up online, a lot of the times it's penned as being like the worst movie ever made. The worst kind of like horror movie ever made. And I when I saw it, I was just like, you gotta be kidding me. And I bought it. And since then, I'm like, nope, this movie is the shit. It's my favorite, you know, grindhouse movie, horror slasher, exploitation movie of all time. I just love it. I love that movie to death. I did a show. I've done a few shows on that movie. I did a Facebook Live show. I've done a couple of posts about that film. And I just did about a month or two ago. I did a show for the channel for the Film Fanatic YouTube channel. I did a video just on Tourist Trap, and and I've come in contact since I've done that, and I also did a big post of a review of it on Instagram on my main at Film Fanatic page, and I was amazed by the responses. Like there were so many people that responded to that movie and to that review, saying how much they really loved that movie, and I couldn't believe it. And it was the same. This film, The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave, has followed the same trajectory as that experience of like how I rediscovered Tourist Trap. Only this movie I had never seen before up until like maybe 10 years ago, and it's grown to be one of my favorite exploitation movies. And it's at face value, it's such it's so utterly a piece of trash, but I can't help it. And I don't really believe, like, people talk about this idea of like guilty pleasures where there might be a song or a movie or a band or whatever of where by the majority of people it's like regarded as like pure crap, but then but they find themselves in particularly like really drawn to that to that thing of where they either it's like purely out of nostalgic reasons, but they just get a lot of pleasure, and it's like just a fun thing when they experience it again, and over time it just grows, and but but a lot of times now when people talk about those things, it's called like a guilty pleasure because they don't want to like necessarily admit that to their friends or in public that they really love this thing that most people hate or despise, but they generally, love it and they get off on it. And I don't really, it's like for me, I don't really believe, I've done away with thinking, I did think of that or believe in that kind of description for a long time. But after like, well, more so around these experiences with, or this experience with these two films, Tourist Trap and The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave, are like really good examples of where I just naturally like gravitated to these movies and to these things of where, most people would look at that as a joke or a pile of crap. But there's something about it that I just dig and I love. And I decided, well, no, it's like you like what you like, and it doesn't matter, and who cares what people think. And so I like disregarded that whole idea of like a guilty pleasure. It's like no, you like what you like. We all have varied tastes. We all have varied opinions. And if you like something or you're attracted to something, it's gonna happen, on a conscious level or an unconscious level. You'll naturally kind of go back to it without really thinking about it because you're attracted to it. And that's the experiences I've had around these two movies. And then just in general with things that I like or that I love, particularly since we're doing film stuff here, uh, a lot of movies that I've embraced over the years, and then I've been reliving again, and a lot of movies I have discovered again, or that I've never seen before, but I'm discovering for the first time. It's the same kind of thing. These are movies that are not embraced by the masses, but I don't really care, and to a degree, it makes it even cooler that there's not a lot of people talking about these movies because I feel like they're these weird little, underground gems that are just totally fun, and yet people, unrun regard, don't take them seriously at all. Don't like have any regard for them, and they just dismiss them. And I think for me, it almost adds an extra aspect of coolness to it. But yeah, I love this film. I love this film, and that's to me is like kind of the whole essence of my attraction to the exploitation world. And getting back to The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave, the director Emilio Miraglia was an Italian director, and he worked throughout the '70s, and he worked as a producer, a writer. He worked as a technician on a bunch of like B movies during that time, and it's hard to believe this came out in '71, which is insane. And his two big films that he worked on and directed was this one here, The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave. He's most well known for that one. And then also this other film, The Red Queen Kills Seven Times, which I have not ever seen. Um, and yeah, just wild. Like, and he's worked on quite a few films. Other films that he worked on, one that dates back to 1968, Frame Up, 1968, Joe Dakota, 1971, and then another one, '68, The Vatican, um, The Assassination in 1967. Uh, so he had, a pretty wild career. I mean, and he carved out a little bit of a niche. But one of the things I've been finding super fascinating and interesting about a lot of these exploitation directors, they've, I've come across I've discovered or rediscovered a lot of films that I loved as a kid. But then I've also mostly lately I've been, as far as really recently, I've been discovering all kinds of new films and all kinds of new directors that I never knew about. And one of the things that I find that like where they all have some kind of commonality to it or some kind of there's like similar things going on is I find that a lot of these directors in the exploitation world have like just wild backgrounds. Like they've worked in all kinds of different facets of films. They've worked, in say in the filmmaking department itself. They've worked a lot as like say an actor. They might have a lot of them have backgrounds in theatrical, being a theatrical director for plays. They've they've been involved with writing screenplays, directing films. They've also been involved with the effects department. They've worked and also scoring the films. They've worked in like almost every facet of the filmmaker. Of what the films or the creative teams that make up a film or make a film successful or make a film happen. They've worked in all those departments. That's one interesting thing I've seen, and I think that's due to probably the biggest thing is not having a real budget. So it's forced a lot of the directors and the creative forces to really collaborate and to wear all these different hats, and it really just adds a uniqueness and a really unique flavor to how these films were made. Because if you look at say typically quote unquote like big budget Hollywood films, like say films on like for example like 20th century Fox, there's always these like very specific teams that are used to make a film. You have maybe a director that is hired in the beginning and is attached to the project, and then it goes, and then the screenplay is created, and there's various drafts of that, and then once the and there's usually a team brought in or one sole writer from that's hired, as a separate department once to write the screenplay, and once that's greenlit, there's now a casting situation where they bring in an agency to cast these actors. And then they do after that, they if the project's been greenlighted, they also hire up another department to handle scouting out areas of where they can shoot, the locations. And then they also hire a separate effects department. And so everybody has a very specific role. And as far as getting locations, they have to go through the legal channel of getting permits and getting approval and all these things. But in the exploitation world, it seems like a lot of these films and directors, like, they didn't really have that luxury of having a big budget. So they're all kind of working together all the time, and a lot of the times the director or the producer, they're all like wearing numerous hats at the same time. And there's also the case of where, if they're shooting a certain thing like on a location, they're not getting those permits. It's like this total like guerrilla style of filmmaking. They're just doing it, and it's kind of dangerous. One of the big examples of that is my favorite slasher film of all time, Bill Lustig's Maniac. There's a whole famous scene in that movie where Tom Savini, the great Tom Savini, probably the greatest effects guy on the planet, did the effects for Maniac, but then he's also in the movie itself. But there's a whole scene of where they used a live shotgun, and they shot the scene of where the maniac is killing these two people, but he uses a live shotgun, and they did that whole scene without any permits, and it was totally illegal. They could have all easily been like arrested and thrown in prison, and where they use a live shotgun, and dangerous, but they just did it. They just found this location, they did it really quickly, and then they got the hell out of there. And to me, that's like the essence of how a lot of these films were made. It has that punk rock kind of aesthetic, and just really working outside of the system, and trying to be creative, and trying to deal with not having any real significant budget. So what can you do? Like, how do you make this work? How do you design it? And we don't have the luxury to like have 100 takes of this one scene. So we got to like get it and done, kind of thing. And obviously it brings about all those other qualities of where people, well, they're just bad movies. They don't have a budget. Their acting is bad. Blah blah blah. But I think it just adds this grittiness to the films that just make them lovable. And that's why this genre is my favorite. And this movie is The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave is, I feel like, just a classic example of that. Such an awesome movie. Super sleazy, super bizarre, very psychedelic. Yeah, just a wild ride. And again, I'm always blown away that this movie came out in '71. Like that's totally nuts. Like I always often think like, what if if a movie like this that deals with the whole like psychosexual um, nature of these characters, like and it's definitely a taboo, but I wonder like, wow, could a movie like this be made today? It's just wild, and to think that this a movie that really pushes envelopes and is really a like pretty heavy exploration into quote unquote serious taboo. Um, you know how it's mind-boggling. This came out in '71, and they were exploring these things then. Um, but awesome movie. I really need to get this on Blu-ray. I need to get a upgrade on this. I'm really happy with this copy of it, but it's I'm perfectly happy with this for now. So thanks again. This is Jason Dean. Uh, if you like these videos, please subscribe and like my videos. One of the cool things I might have mentioned it, but there's a guy recently who just subscribed to the channel, and we've corresponded a few times because he's been commenting on some of the videos, and it's been very cool. And he seems to be a big fan of horror films, and he says he's been checking out a lot of the videos, but he's also been like, um, you know, making little lists of some of these films, particularly around the films he's never seen, and he's like really been enjoying it. And to me, that's what this channel's all about. Maybe bringing a few films to the table that some folks who like horror films but might want to take a little bit of a deep dive that have never seen before, and maybe bringing those films to the table, shedding a little bit of light on them. And you never know, you might discover something. I know it has for me. Discover something that just totally blows you away, and yeah, that's why I love doing it. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.